And welcome. It's Michigan's AutoTalk Podcast, and this is episode number 99. Every episode of Michigan's AutoTalk Podcast is all about celebrating the automobile, everything automotive, and also about helping and supporting you, car and truck owners across our great state of Michigan, birthplace of everything automotive. As a reminder, we're everywhere you hear your favorite podcast. Our flagship is the iHeartRadio app. And you can also catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, and just about any other place, including your favorite smart speaker. I am producer Phil Tower. Host Al Schwinkendorf is here, along with John Puhek from Cascade, from Berg's Automotive in beautiful Cascade, Michigan. And I got to give credit to Al Schwinkendorf for bringing our guest on this program. This is a guest we were originally going to try to squeeze in at the auto show, Al, and we knew we needed a lot of time for this guy. And I'm doing a little Google search. Karl Bloss, Dr. Karl Bloss is everywhere on the internet. He's got quite a presence. He's on multiple podcasts, and he has a BS, an MS, and a PhD in chemical engineering. So he is truly Dr. Chemical. And let's face it, everything that happens inside a battery is all about great chemical reactions. So with no further ado, Al, I'll let you take it from here.
First off, Karl, I'd like you to introduce yourself, and we got to say we really hope that you can come back again because I know we can't cover in 15, 20 minutes everything that is to cover here. But first and foremost, what I'd like you to go over is talking to people at the car show. People, I don't know, Edmunds or somebody put out a thing that said something like 60% of Americans looking to buy a new car are considering an EV, but we don't know what we don't know. It's not you buy the car, you go to the gas station when it needs fuel. You're fueling it yourself at home, and we'd like to tap into your expertise and learn what that's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I mean, the quick background, how I got into EVs. So I did work in the chemical industry, and I worked for a German multinational. I had the opportunity to go on an expat assignment, and gas in Germany was the equivalent of $7 and $8 a gallon. So when I came back from that, I said, okay, I want to look for something more efficient. And that was the year 2014, and it was right about when the first commercial EVs were hitting the road. So the Nissan Leafs, the Chevy Volts. And so to make a long story short, I decided to buy an off-lease 2-year-old Nissan Leaf as my running around car just to see how it would work. We still had a gas minivan. And what I quickly found was that, first of all, my employer had free charging. So I was essentially driving for free. But even without that, just doing the math, I'm an engineer, I build spreadsheets. So I was doing the analysis, how much it would cost. And it was just so incredibly cheap. What ended up happening is we only used our minivan for road trips. And it got to the point where we were using it 2-3 times a year. And it kind of went from there. And then I got into a Tesla and other vehicles along the way. And then did this sort of thing as a outreach, for fun. I retired from the chemical industry, moved back to Michigan, where I was during part of my career, where we really love West Michigan. I live in Muskegon. And so being on social media, started a new Facebook group, and then at some point crossed paths with Bethany Tabor, who was the EV group, one of the EV group members at Consumers Energy. Said, we really need somebody who's had experience in this. We want to get into this a big way, but we want to do the right thing. So they asked me to join them, and the rest is kind of history for the last 2.5 years.
Have you purchased a new EV, or have you always purchased used?
Nope. I've purchased, my first one was used, and since then I've always purchased new, simply because the technology was changing so fast. Yeah. Once we had driven the old Leaf quickly, we quickly figured out that this is what we wanted to do.
And, I think that's a whole episode, like we talked about a little earlier, about, what do you need to know when you're buying, even if it's a hybrid, a used EV. But what happens if I buy a new Tesla, or I buy a new Ford Mach-E, does it come with a charger in the trunk that I take home and plug into my wall, or how does the charging thing all work?
Yeah, great question. So from day one, any EV can charge from a regular household outlet. And most of them do come with a 120 volt charging cord. So the one end goes into regular outlet, 20 amps, let's say. And then the other end has what's called a J1772 plug. That's a Society of Automotive Engineers standard SAE. So we call it the J plug. That's what goes into the charge port of an EV. But at that point, you're charging very slowly because that power outlet and that cable are limited in their power output. So you're looking at, something like what a hairdryer would be, 1,500 watts, something like that. So you're getting about 4 miles of range per hour of charging, or let's say 40, 50 miles overnight. Now, for some people, that's good enough. But for a lot of people, they say, well, I need a little bit more. So, that's fundamentally what you get with the vehicle. Now, there are exceptions. Tesla used to provide a high power mobile charger that had both a 120 volt inlet and what's called a NEMO 1450, which it's like an electric range plug, or if you're an RV person, it's the same thing as the RV plug in an RV park. So the high power. So at that point, you're getting 25 miles of range per hour of charging, or easily charge, just about the biggest EV battery there is overnight from home. And that's what makes it super convenient.
And I got to believe, knowing Ohm's law, that you're actually, even though there might be some expense in having an electrician come out and wire up your garage or driveway or whatever so you can put in the bigger charger, it probably in the long run is going to cost you less to charge off the high volt than it is the 120, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very similar, but one of the main reasons it actually becomes cheaper is because now you can fully charge during those cheaper off-peak periods, right? So if you have a level 1 cord, that slower one, you're going to want to plug it in as soon as you get home because you're going to need every minute of that charge.
Right.
Whereas with a level 2, at this point, you're like, well, let me just go when it's cheaper. Let me program this thing. And all EVs have some kind of a scheduler on it that say, okay, plug it in whenever you get home, but I'm not going to start charging until 11 p.m. when the rates are cheaper. And now, it's depending on how many miles you need to replenish, it'll finish up at 2 a.m. So now you're getting the absolute best rates possible.
Yeah.
I've also heard that it's a fallacy that all the government breaks, I don't know what you want to call them, but it used to be buy an EV and get a $7,500 tax credit or something like that. Yeah. Some of those have come back.
Yeah. So the original law, the way it was written, was every manufacturer that offered EVs would qualify the buyer of the new vehicle for $7,500 up to the point where that manufacturer sold 200,000 units. So Chevy and Tesla quickly hit their 200,000 unit mark. So Teslas no longer were eligible for that tax credit just because they sold too many cars. And it was the same thing with Chevy because of the Chevy Volt qualified for that. And there were a ton of those Volts sold. So then every other manufacturer that hadn't brought out a lot of EVs in the US, they were still eligible for that. And so it was based on number of units.
So with that tax credit, did you, like, if you were the first one in, you got it, and then down the road, if you bought it later, you weren't able to receive that? Or
only the first buyer.
Okay. Oh no, what I think he's saying is if there's, are you talking about brand new, John, or are you talking about we've got 200,000 of these cars we're selling, and some of the people got the credit and some of them didn't?
Exactly. Brand new. Yeah. Right. So
so the way it worked is once unit number 200,001 was sold, in that calendar quarter, the full tax credit was still available. So let's say the last vehicle that's eligible for that is sold on January 1st. If you buy a vehicle from that manufacturer on March 31st, you are still eligible for the full $7,500 tax credit.
Okay.
And then the way it works is you buy the vehicle, and then when you do your taxes the following year, you have to have enough tax liability, right? So if you don't pay any taxes, you don't get any back. But if you're paying federal taxes, income taxes, then over that $7,500 limit, then that will be deducted from your tax liability. Gotcha. It's not a tax deduction. It's a full tax credit. So for example, I bought a 2022 Kia Niro so I bought it before the Inflation Reduction Act, which by the way changed everything. So we need to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
I bought it before that. So it's when I did my taxes, my 22 taxes recently, I now got the credit for it, and I got that much more of a refund. as a result.
Gotcha.
So there's a kind of a delayed gratification.
How much of a credit was that?
$7,500.
Okay.
So
it's the same. Okay.
It's the same. Okay. Yeah. It's the same thing. Board. Right.
Okay.
And so now, as soon as the Inflation Reduction Act got signed into law, which was August of 22, then the picture immediately changed. So unfortunately for the manufacturers that still hadn't sold 200,000 units, their tax credit eligibility went away. So if on August, I believe it was 17th, but don't quote me on it, but let's say on August 18th, the day after you now went out and bought a Kia full electric, you were no longer eligible for that tax credit. And now the IRA, the way it's written, has to do with also where the vehicle is manufactured, where some of the components are manufactured, and it also changes over time because they want to give manufacturers time to catch up.
That's awesome.
What that did is over time, and it's trying to bring some of this manufacturing back into our shores, which I personally think is a good thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes these things are executed a little poorly and it's confusing, but I think they want to do the right thing. And actually, it's already happened. A lot of these manufacturers are now bringing manufacturing of those vehicles back here into the U.S. Right. So there's that. But right off the bat, what happened is Chevy, for example, who was no longer eligible because of the number of units they had sold, was now eligible again, which was huge because the Bolt EV is already one of the cheapest long-range EVs out there. And boom, you got another $7,500. So a car that maybe was, let's say it was $27,500. Now you could get it for $20,000 effectively. Again, has to do with how much tax credit you get.
And it's working because we're seeing more and more of them out there.
And unfortunately, yesterday it was just announced that GM is stopping the manufacturing by the end of this year. I have some mixed feelings about that. I understand that they want to go to the next generation of EVs. I think the Equinox is one that they're saying is going to be a good price point, $30,000. It's also going to have much faster charging. So I'm happy that the technology is moving on. But for those people that were looking for a bargain EV, to me, the Bolt EV was a great vehicle from that perspective. It's not one that I would personally want to drive to California for different reasons, but for a regional vehicle and for getting around inexpensively, that one was hard to beat.
I think it's GM is really, really rolling the dice because the Equinox, anyone who has a current Equinox has certain opinions about it, and to have them buy another one, have it be a little bit higher, the Equinox, those things are not.
They're really good for our business. Just
exactly. We'll just leave it at that. But
so bottom line is they have to do a lot of work on the EV to make that better.
Exactly.
No, not on the EV, just on the Equinox and the internal combustion engine EV. So I've got two questions, and I know John's got some. First off, do you know the numbers about the tax credit on the Class 8 Tesla semi truck?
Oh gosh, no, I'm out of my wheelhouse there.
That's fine. I've just heard some things that are absolutely insane. These things the price must be astronomical because California just had a law where there's no non-emission diesel semi trucks allowed in the state anymore. And they went out and they talked to Elon, and anybody who buys one of his Class 8 full electrics gets this. It's like $120,000 credit for purchasing one in California, which I thought was crazy. Do you follow Rivian?
Yes, a little bit.
I've just started seeing their electric vehicles out and about in our neighborhoods for Amazon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that Amazon and Rivian kind of designed that thing. Yes. Rivian built it for them. I also heard that Rivian kind of, because they're so far behind, Amazon just kind of cut off their order. They're supposed to get like 100,000 of them, and they've got delivered something like 20 so far. They're moving on. And I also learned that Amazon was the largest single stockholder in Rivian. I'm kind of worried that even though we see more and more of their pickups and SUVs out on the road in our neighborhood every day, that maybe that's a company that's not going to be hanging in there so long.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about their fiscal viability, but what I do know is that the owners absolutely love them. So I've seen now the R1Ts, the trucks, And what I saw recently, I organized a Drive Electric Earth Day show in Grand Rapids recently, and we had an R1S there, and I got to see it in the flesh, and it was like the star of the show. So I have an uncle who's on the list to get one. So everybody's dying to get their hands on one. So I think it's just a matter of how quickly can they get them out the door, and then hopefully collect enough money so they can keep the company going.
Al, you had another question, and I want to jump in with a question too, but go ahead with your second question for Karl. I have one about consumers' energy and rebates.
No, you go right ahead, because there's a bunch of stuff he can tell us about them and what consumers can and will do for an EV owner. It's awesome.
Karl, you in your position with consumers' energy, I think one of the probably overlooked areas when buying an EV. Obviously, everybody looks at the tax credit, but I know consumers in the past has offered rebates. There have been incentives. What is Consumers Energy doing right now that you're aware of or has done in the past, maybe thinking about reinitiating in the future to spur on more EV purchases? So
our program is called Power My Drive, and there's a residential component and a commercial component. So residential meaning for homeowners. If you own or lease an EV and you want to put in charging at your house, then what we can do is give you $500 credit towards the purchase of what we call an EVSE, or a lot of people call the charger. It's the wall box that you plug into the high power outlet. So that's typically a $600 to $700 unit. So try to take some of the sting out of that. We will give you a $500 credit towards that. We are moving towards a permanent program. So we do have approval from the MPSC to continue this. This is currently a pilot program, and it's doing everything the MPSC has asked of us. So we are moving forward with a permanent program. It's going to change the terms slightly. We're looking at rebating the installation of the home circuit itself as opposed to the charger. I think we've learned everything that we want to learn from the network chargers. So now we can kind of move away from that and just rebate the installation of the home circuit itself. And as far as what that costs, we're finding a typical standard installation. And by standard, I mean, you don't have to upgrade your panel. You have a reasonable wire run. So, not hundreds of feet of wire. You don't have any trenching, anything like that. Let's say you can just go from your basement panel up to your garage with let's say 50 feet. I don't remember exactly the number. The average cost of something like that would be about $900 and something dollars. So we can give you $500 towards that. And again, that takes some of the sting out of it.
Sure.
The other thing we want is for people to charge overnight. So one of the questions we get often is, where's all this energy going to come from? Well, the reality is the demand at nighttime is so low that we can already charge all the EVs on the road now. But what we need people to do is to charge overnight. So what we do is we give preferential rates for charging overnight. And then we also have a program called the Smart Charging Incentive, where if we're trying to establish this habit, if you charge exclusively overnight, we're going to give you $10 a month for 12 months. If you charge only overnight, you get 3 times a month where you can charge on peak. And then that starts to establish that habit. And what we're finding is that there's over 90% compliance in that. And then we don't have any issues with grid reliability or anything like that.
We're going to put the link for Power My Drive. It's POWERMI, obviously for the state of Michigan. We'll put that up on our podcast page and the episode page for this, so our listeners will be able to see that. It's very helpful. It's interesting to note, Department of Energy stats from 2021, the most recent numbers available, show that Michigan had 17,500 EVs on the road out of about 8.7 million registered vehicles here in the state. That's about 0.2% of all vehicles. It seems like driving around, anecdotally, there are more than that. But that was as of 2021. And the goal is obviously to be a lot higher than that by 2030. At one point, there was a hope that would be closer to 15 or 20,000. Don't know what it's going to take to get there, but certainly those great incentives, like you just mentioned, from Consumers Energy, more aggressive tax rebates. I don't know about you guys, but just hearing Karl and the two of you talk about tax incentives, it's mind-numbing, and the average consumer just says, to heck with it, I'll just go buy a regular combustion engine vehicle. I think it's got to be made a lot simpler, in my opinion.
It's going to change.
It's
there's more and more.
Yeah,
and when you got neighbors that have them, and it changes.
Yeah, and you figure it out. So the other thing that's happening through the IRA is that instead of giving a federal tax credit after the fact, this program is going to migrate so that it's cash on the hood. So the dealers are going to get these tax credits. So at that point, you're not waiting a full year to take advantage of that. The other thing that's happening is the IRA has a provision for used EVs. So if you buy a used EV from a dealer, a licensed dealer, and it's under $25,000, you get a $2,500 tax credit. That's already there now. So there are lots of cool little things happening. And the CPAs are becoming more aware. When I did my taxes this year, I was prepared to, tell my CPA everything, and they already knew. They're like, yep, we got the forms, we get it. There are enough people doing it. We have the experience. So, before you make any of these big dollar decisions, talk to your CPA and say, this is what I'm planning to do. What do you know about it? And they can help you.
Great advice. And not only that, I think, like you said, if the federal government can find a way to pass that IRS rebate onto the dealers, so it's a one-stop thing, I think you're going to see numbers go up considerably. And I think it's really just a matter of doing the research, like you said, and starting with the guy who you pay once a year or whoever it would be to do your taxes. That's great advice. And just a couple of minutes left. Al, I don't know if you have anything else for Karl.
Yeah, I do. Just the one and only thing, and this is for future talk, but something we didn't mention at all here, is there is a growing segment of the baby boomer gearheads that are moving to electric vehicles. YouTube's full of Teslas on the drag strip. I'll tell you from personal experience, in February, I was driving down 131, somewhere between, let's say, M6 and 96, a nice flat straight area, and I'm following this Lucid Air, which I followed very close. It was dark out, but they are so freaking cool. And up comes a Hellcat. I see him in my rearview mirror. He's at least doing 100, and he passes that Lucid, and he taps on the brakes, and he slows down and gets next to him, makes the signs or whatever, and the Hellcat takes off. The Lucid gave him a couple car lengths, and then he stood on it, and he kicked his butt to the point where the Hellcat just backed down to 70 miles an hour. There's performance. There's so much with EVs that people don't get or understand, and they're new and they're different and all that. But
so I remember cool. A quote from I think it was Motor Trend magazine, and they said, we can tell people until we're blue in the face about torque at 0 RPM and all that stuff, and people don't get it. You give them a ride in a Tesla Plaid, and you floor it, and they go full Tourette's on you. So they have no idea. Yeah. I mean, I used to have the Tesla I used to have was a P85D. It was the Plaid of the day in 2015. I have heard so many holy bleeps, and it's you have to experience it. I mean, sure, read about it all you want. Look at the YouTube videos. Find a friend with a performance Tesla or a regular Tesla, for that matter, and check it out. And actually, that's just a party trick. They're super smooth. They're fun. They're fun to ride in. But it's a game changer. What we say in the education outreach area, you have to get butts and seats. You should experience it.
You should have seen Johnny's face when he came back. We had put like winter tires and wheels on a customer of ours, Mach-E, and this guy drives like a bunch of old British cars, Triumphs and Jags and stuff like that.
I used to have Porsches. I had a 944 Turbo. It was a lot of fun. I love the way it sounds. But holy cow, you get somebody and you feel that torque, and tell me it's got no soul, and I call BS.
Oh yeah, well Johnny had to go for a ride to make sure that those wheels didn't vibrate at high speed, and he came back, he was grinning for 2 days.
Yeah, I can remember the old was it the saying, life begins at 3,000 RPM, when you have the old Porsches, and man, that Mach-E Ford, life began at as soon as you put the pedal down. It was something else, and it's like, okay, well, I got nothing.
It's like,
thank you, Karl, so much.
Absolutely.
We're running out of time here, and we definitely need to have you back on.
Karl, real quickly, any recommendations for online resources through Consumers Energy? We'll put up the Power My Drive link up.
Yeah, Power My Drive is the rebates. The main page, consumersenergy.com/EV. Simple as that.
We'll put that one up as well, too. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you again soon.